situation to risk his life to help one of his fallen soldiers in a sticky situation. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. And I will always be indebted to him. Through the time the war went on, we waited. At that time, we still hadn't received word when the war would start. January 15th with Lumen was the deadline. I remember we were all sitting there, and you could probably hear a pin drop the whole day. Most of us sat around and played spades all day without even talking, just hoping that Saddam would sign that line so that we didn't have to go to war. The other thing was that we had been sitting there for long enough that we were saying, let's go. If we're going to do it, let's go. Because as soon as it starts, we at least know it'll end sometime. He did not sign that line. We went to bed that night about 3 in the morning. My lieutenant come knocking. We used to sleep in the medics track because they had the litters and it was a little more roomy and comfortable in there. Come knocking on our door, banging on the door, I should say, and said, "Wooly Martin, let's go. The Navy just launched like 300 missiles and the war is starting." That was probably the biggest dose of reality I think I've ever received in my life. But it was like an orchestra. I never realized how many people were over there at that time. The desert was just, it looked like a moving floor because all the vehicles blended in with the desert. Throughout the time we moved north, each day we moved a little farther, positioning ourselves for, quote, the ground war. We made it to the border probably about 30 days later when, quote, the ground war hadn't started yet. But I had never seen air dominance like this country in my life. Every day you would just see jets flying back and forth. And then usually 2 or 3 times a day you'd see way up there, we call them the big 3. B-52s would fly over and you'd lose sight of them. And then about half an hour later, that's all you heard for a couple hours. Now imagine being on the other side. Thank God I'm an American. When we did cross into Iraq, we received many POWs. They did not want to fight. Most of them didn't even want to go and fight, but they were pulled out of their houses and told to go fight. We actually came up to some people that surrendered, a tank crew that had 100 rounds stacked behind their vehicle, but the commanders for Saddam drained their gas tank. So they had to stay there and fight. They couldn't leave. They convinced their soldiers that we ate our prisoners of war, so they wouldn't surrender. But as time went by, they were a defeated army. And we actually took so many POWs that we just had to keep sending them back. You know, we would check them for guns and bombs and grenades, and we would just tell them to keep walking that way. It was success. I think what made it so successful, and I commend George Bush for this, President George Bush, he stayed out and let the generals run the war. General Schwarzkopf did a phenomenal job. This man was flawless. Everything we did was just incredible. Our intelligence was incredible. We literally moved a click a day, and each time we moved, we pretty much knew where they were. So it was pretty, I won't say easy, but it was nice knowing where they were. Now, they weren't always where they were supposed to be, which made it a little hairy sometimes, but I just want to thank General Schwarzkopf, Colin Powell, and all the rest of the command for being so successful. And while lives were lost, I think many were saved just by their expertise. In closing, I'm going to kind of change speed here a little bit. I made a phone call last night, and I talked to a gentleman. He was not feeling well. He was here earlier, and he apparently had to leave. He wanted to meet an individual. I talked to him, and he was very adamant about not being talked about. But as we're going to be talking about later, I reached out to I was talking to a gentleman when we were talking about moving the monument outside, and Holly's monument. And he was very interested. And I said, well, I'd like you to contact Jack. He's the commander, talk with him or whatever. And we actually met had our lunch, Abe Jones wrote us a check for $1,000. And he said, move that monument. If it's less, the museum keeps it. If it's more, you let me know. And I just want to recognize him for that. He had to leave. He was not feeling well. He's 82 years old. He was a World War II veteran, Air Force veteran. He actually snuck in when he was 15 years old. And when he got done with his service, they actually tried to draft him again for World War II. So he is just an individual I wanted to thank. My neighbor I invited him today, but he had fell and hurt his hip. 96-year-old World War II veteran. His boat was sank in World War II, and he was one of 70 survivors. His name is Fred Retzlaff. In closing, now that I'm on this political side of the world too now, I've been watching the news lately, and it's really got me frustrated with people protesting, which they have the right, but they're stepping on flags and they're burning on flags. And you know what? You do have the right to do that. But I just want you to know that when you choose to do that, you're not really you're protesting, but you're stepping on that flag, and that represents a lot of people in this country. A lot of fallen veterans, a lot of people that fought for that flag. And it really upsets me, and I don't normally like to talk about my opinions too much, but I just wanted to share that. So in closing, there is a lot of things wrong with this country. A lot of people complaining about the government, and they have that right. A lot of people complaining about the way the country's going. However, deep down in my heart, I still think this is the greatest country in the world. And it was an absolute honor for me to serve my country. As of now, it's an absolute honor to serve my city. So I'd like to thank you for allowing me to step up and speak. And on behalf of all Desert Storm veterans, I salute all those that served before me, with me, and all those that are serving now and that will continue to serve. Thank you very much.
Very well spoken, Jim. Now for the Taylor Veterans Museum address, call on the chairman, Jack Morris.
Everybody else has left except for State Representative Eric Geis. Thank you for staying and waiting to hear my speech. Honored guests, Mayor Sollers, ladies and gentlemen, City Council members. I want to welcome you to the 65th anniversary of Armed Forces Day. You'll notice that we and Taylor here kind of combined Armed Forces Day along with Memorial Day, which occurs on this year, Monday, May 25th. On August 31st, 1949, Secretary of Defense Lewis Johnson announced the creation of an Armed Forces Day to replace the separate Army, Navy, and Air Force days. The single-day celebration stemmed from a unification of the armed forces under one department. That would be the Department of Defense. Each of the military leagues and orders were asked to drop sponsorship of a specific service day in order to create the newly announced Armed Forces Day. The Army, Navy, and Air Force leagues adopted the newly formed day. Okay, Marines, here you go. The Marine Corps League declined to drop support for the Marine Corps Day, but did support Armed Forces Day. In the speech announcing formation of the day, President Truman praised the work of the military services at home and across the seas, and said their work is vital to the security of the nation and the establishment of desired peace. Armed Forces Day, May 20th, 1950, marked the first combined demonstration of America's defense in progress under the National Security Act towards the goal of readiness and any eventuality. The theme of the first Armed Forces Day was Teamed for Defense. as a means of expressing the unification of military forces under one department. However, there were other purposes too. It was a type of educational program for civilians, one of which where there would be an increased awareness of the military. It was designed to expand public knowledge of jobs performed and the role of the military. And it was a day to honor and acknowledge the men and women of the armed forces of the United States. President John Kennedy in 1962 at the Armed Forces Day celebration said, "Word to the nation, guard zealously your right to serve in the armed forces, for without them there would be no other rights to guard." That ends my little speech here. However, I would like to recognize a young man. We give out scholarships every year to Truman High School and Kennedy High School to the ROTC programs. On behalf of the Taylor Veterans Museum, the Kennedy recipient, Joshua Brown, is here today. Josh, stand up.